Today we are talking about burn accidents in babies and children, prevention, recognition, and what to do if your child is burned. My name is Sarah Hunstead. I am a paediatric nurse, mum of two, and author of wrong way. A Life, a Finger, a Pea Up a Nose, a practical guide to baby and child first aid. And as I said, today we are talking all about prevention, recognition, and response to burns in children. But before we go on any further, can I get you to give me a wave or a thumbs up just to make sure that all the technology is working as it should? And what I would love you to do is in the comments below, feel free to ask questions at any time throughout our session today. And remember, tag any of your friends or family in there who you think will benefit from knowing all about burns in kids, because this is information that we want everybody to know about. As a paediatric emergency nurse, I spent most of my career in emergency departments, and I know that what you do in those minutes before an ambulance arrives will directly impact on the outcome of your child. That's why it is so important for you to know these life-saving skills. So let's get into this, burn injuries. Now, if you're in Australia, you may have seen in the media lately there have been a few accidents, particularly pertaining to burns in toddlers around fire pits and fires. Now, this is something that is relatively common. The most common type of burn in little ones is actually hot liquid scalds. So when the toddler reaches up and pulls that hot cup of tea or coffee or the bowl of noodles, reaches up and that pot of boiling peas on the stove and pulls them over the top of themselves. So certainly hot drinks and hot foods such as soups and noodles are the most common. But we are seeing a bit of fire pit and fire injuries, as in campfire injuries. One of the things that I really want you to remember is that if you are camping, it is incredibly important that you never, ever, ever put the fire out with just sand, because what can happen is the sand goes over the top, and what happens is it just basically acts like an oven. The coals that are in there, even though the flames may be extinguished, can be hundreds of degrees for up to 8-10 hours later. So an unsuspecting child, you've left your campsite, a next family come along, unsuspecting child can't see that there has been a fire there because there is sand over the top. They run over in their bare feet and they end up with terribly burned feet. It is more common than you think. So please always, always, always put out a campfire with copious amounts of water. It is incredibly important. Don't cover it with dirt or sand. So that's a bit of prevention, but what about in the home? First of all, if you've got an open fire or a fire with a flame, then using a fire guard is a good thing to do, because we don't want little hands on top of heated heat. In my house, we have a glass-fronted fireplace that heats up really, really hot. And when my kids were little, they were fascinated by it. They wanted to go and put their hands on it. So we let them. Not when it was really, really hot, but what we did is we used it as an education session. So we let it heat up a little bit so they could feel that it was hot, but nowhere near enough to do them any injury, because children learn by doing. They learn by play, they learn by consequence. So they touched it, they realized, oh, that's hot. And from that time on, they never had that fascination of touching it again. Even still now, so many years later, it's just innate in them just to kind of give the fireplace a wide berth. You can do the same with the oven and so on, but of course making sure that it is an education session, not letting them hurt themselves at all. So that's a really important thing. Other things that we can do that are really important to prevent burns: keeping cords for kettles and have pan handles turned in on the stove so they can't pull those things on top. Being aware that when you go to somebody else's house, like certainly, we're a bit restricted in that at the moment, but when you're going back round to grandma's and grandma doesn't realize that your child developmentally has changed so much that they can pull themselves up now. And that cup of hot tea that was safe before sitting on the coffee table now isn't. Or even going for a walk with bub in the pouch, so you've got them nice and close to you. don't drink your hot coffee over the top because the lid can pop off and the hot coffee can go on top of bub. So being really aware of those sorts of things. And as cafes start to open up again, then, making sure that, the well-meaning but possibly just not experienced waiter or waitress passing that hot cup of, cappuccino over the top of the pram, that we're aware of these sorts of things because burn injuries can certainly happen. But there is one more thing in your home that I really, really want you to do. And that is make sure your hot water system is turned down to 50 degrees. Now, it's actually a regulator that does this. So there's a certain temperature that your hot water system needs to be, but you can contact a plumber, gas fitter, so on, so that the temperature that's actually coming out of your tap is no more than 50 degrees, because this reduces the risk of burn injury significantly. Okay, significantly. So please make sure that the temperature coming out of your tap is 50 degrees less out of the hot water tap, because that saves so many accidents with that prevention. So we could talk about prevention forever, but there are a few key things there that you can do. And I'll also pop in the comments below an article from Kids Safe as well, with a checklist for you to be able to go about your house and make sure that prevention is one of the things that are at the forefront of your mind. Okay, so let's get into the burns themselves. Now, this is something that is relatively common and happens more in winter as well. Kids burn themselves, whether it's reaching up onto the barbecue to grab another sausage and, putting their hand on a hot plate, to pulling that hot cup of tea down themselves. There is certain things that we definitely need to do. So let's go through that now. What is the first aid? First of all, what we're going to do is we're going to remove, cool, cover, seek. So the first thing we need to do is we need to remove the heat source. Now, one thing that certainly that you may have been taught as a child, if you grew up in Australia, is stop, drop and roll. And I'm sure in other countries as well that you may have heard that if somebody has actually, their clothing is on fire. So this isn't something that we see as much of as what we used to, but certainly there is risk with campfire injuries, that we are going to stop the flames. So they're going to get them to drop to the floor. We are going to smother the flames, so covering them with a blanket, something like that, and rolling to extinguish. That's what we need to do. So flames out first. Then we go to the remove, cool, cover, seek. We need to remove the heat source. So number one, a good example. If your child has pulled that hot cup of tea onto themselves, we need to remove the clothing, because the clothing will retain heat, okay? So we need to get the clothing off. So we're going to take off their onesie or whatever it is that they're in. But there's one big thing that I want you to remember here. Nappy, 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 okay? So what can happen is if it's a hot liquid school, then the liquid can travel down, it can go down inside the nappy, and nappies are designed to actually retain heat. So, and keep their bub comfortable while their nappy is wet. So having a hot liquid in there, they can actually end up with awful genital burns. So please remove the clothing and the nappy. That's really, really important. And of course, if they're wearing any jewelry or anything like that, then that needs to come off as well. The only time you do not remove the clothing is if it is stuck to the skin. If it's stuck to the skin, then we're going to cool over the top, okay? So we have removed, now we're going to cool. We are going to cool the burn for 20 minutes. And you know what? That seems like, that might as well be 20 hours in a screaming toddler who is in pain. But we have to do it for 20 minutes. And now I apologize to all the vegetarians out there, but there's an analogy that kind of explains why we need to do this. Number one, okay, if we're cooking a piece of meat, say steak, for example, you cook your steak, okay? You then will often take it off the heat and let it rest. And it will actually continue to cook for a little while, even though you've removed it from the heat source. We're the same. That burn will continue to get deeper if we don't cool it. So that is why, even though we've removed the heat source, we need to cool the burn and essentially stop that cooking process. That's what we need to do. And I know that sounds awful, but it has to happen. So we are going to do 20 minutes of cool running tap water. We're not going to put any ice on there. Ice is too cold. It can cause more tissue damage. We're not putting anything on there but water to cool the burn. Okay, really important. If there is no water available in your first aid kit, you may have some burn cooling things, such as there are some burn gels, etc. Some of them are not recommended in children, some of them are okay to use in children. Water is your ideal. If you don't have water available, then follow the instructions from certainly if you've called an ambulance, etc., follow their instruction, or if you have your first aid kit with your burn cooling stuff because no water is available, then use that. Okay, so but 20 minutes of cool running tap water is ideal. One of these in your first aid kit is awesome. So what I would encourage you to do, these, you can just get these from the supermarket, from the hardware store. I got this one from IKEA. So these are just basically spray bottles. We don't want to use something that's had chemicals in it, obviously. So it is a clean one that is kept in your first aid kit, because cool running tap water, we want to keep our kids warm. We don't want to cover all of them with the cool running tap water, only the burned areas. So if it's their hand, it's probably really easy to pop it under, the kitchen tap. Perfect. Maybe the hose outside. Fantastic. But if it is their torso, maybe you're getting in the shower with them, holding them to keep them warm and just letting the water run on here. And, if there's somebody else with you, putting warm towels or blankets around them. But I must say, one of these is a fantastic way to actually cool a burn. So fill this with water. You can keep the unburned areas warm with towels, blankets, etc., your body heat, and you can spray the burn directly. It's particularly good for faces as well, because can you imagine somebody trying to shove your face if it's burned under a shower? It'd be awful, it'd be horrendous. So being able to cool with one of these is a fantastic idea. So if you can, please go and get one of these, add it to your first aid kit in case of burns. They are a really, really handy thing to have. So we've cooled the burn for 20 minutes. Remember, no ice or anything else. So we've cooled. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to cover the burn, but not with any lotions, creams, honey, egg white, none of that. Why? Because a burn in a child needs to be assessed medically if it is blistered, it is significant, if the skin has come away. Why? Because children scar and they've got lots of growing to do. Okay, we all scar, but children have got lots of growing to do and scars don't grow. So that's why we want the best outcome for our kids. And not only that, they can lose a lot of fluid through burns, and so they can go into shock as well. So that's why it's really important that a burn is actually reviewed medically. Of course, if you've cooled, let me tell you a story. That's probably the easiest way to do this. So my daughter was cooking onion and garlic in a pan on the stove with my husband. And they had olive oil in there, and a big piece of onion and garlic spat out and went straight onto her leg and onto his hand. He's dusted it off. Not a problem, not a mark on him. Why? Because we are leathery old crocodiles in comparison to kids. Kids burn at much lower temperatures in a shorter amount of time than what we do. Okay. On her leg, even though he flicked that off before he got the onion off her, she ended up having a red mark there. Cooled it for about a minute. We won't go there. And it was still red. It then started to blister. Back under the cold running tap water. Okay. 20 minutes, it actually resolved. After that, there was actually barely even a mark on there. And so the skin wasn't disrupted. There was one tiny little blister, which, being paediatric nurses, we did manage at home. If we weren't paediatric nurses, I would have taken her to the GP to get that seen. But the major part where we actually cooled, you could barely even see where it had been. So that was a good thing. But they really do need review if, to be honest, you're worried. Trust your gut. If the skin has come away or it is blistered, okay, it's really, really important. We need a proper burns dressing on there because we don't want them to scar, and that's really important. And because they, can lose a lot of fluid. Now, when do you call an ambulance? You call an ambulance if the burn is to the face, if there's potential for any airway involvement, if the burn is to the neck, the torso, okay, around the chest, if it's to a sensitive area such as the genitals. If it is that you can't safely transport your child to hospital because the position of where the burn is, you can't put their car seat straps on. If they are in an enormous amount of pain. And also, please always remember, give your child pain relief. Absolutely, burns, particularly superficial ones, can be incredibly painful. So please give them some pain relief, some analgesia. Absolutely, that is fine for you to do that. But if their pain is significant, they need an ambulance. So very important. The burn is extensive. The burn is across those sensitive areas. There's potential for an airway involvement that is certainly you can't transport them to hospital safely or get them reviewed safely, then please call an ambulance, particularly if their pain is uncontrollable as well. Okay, really important, but continue to cool. That's the most important part here. Now, so we've talked about seeking medical help, but what about cover as well? So if you have just gone, okay, then there's just a small little piece here, I'm going to go to the GP, cover it up first with a non-stick dressing because it will actually help with the pain as well. But don't be tempted to put egg white or honey or any of those other butter, any of those other things on there, because when the burn is reviewed, what will happen is the doctor or the nurse won't be able to see the burn and they will actually have to wipe it off, which will be incredibly painful. So don't put a burn cream, don't put anything on there until the doctor has said that it's okay to do, but they'll put the dressing on anyway, okay? So just cover it with a non-stick dressing. That's the important thing. Don't be tempted to put anything else on it because we need to be able to see the burn in the hospital. So that's what we're going to do. And then, of course, we are seeking medical help. It's really important that we do this. So let's have a look. Jo has actually asked a question, so let's go into this now. She said, a friend's child, age 6, burnt a hand on a defective zip tap at home and the skin peeled away. It was awful. Cooled her hand under running water for 30 minutes and then took her to the hospital. They said without the cold running water, she would have had skin grafts. See, exactly. Thank you, Jo. This is stories that I hear all the time. We had a person who came through one of the CPR Kids classes, a mum, whose daughter, a toddler, just randomly threw a toy and knocked her dad's hot cup of Nespresso up off the shelf onto herself. She cooled it for 30 minutes until ambulance arrived, cooled the burn, I should say, and her child. The burn surgeon at the hospital prepped her, saying she's going to need skin grafts. We're admitting her to hospital. 3 days later, she was discharged home and she has not scarred. She did not need any operations. And the burn surgeon said on discharge, that is because of what you did, Mum, by cooling that burn with your first aid. So she saved her child's skin. So that is why this cooling is so, so, so important. Now, I am going to check now to see if you have any other questions while we're here. Please feel free to type them in down below while we are here, because I would love to be answering your questions. So let me just have a look now. Okay. Doesn't seem like there are any questions at the moment. One question that often I do get in classes though is, why can't you put ice on a burn? Surely if you want to get it cold, ice is the quickest way. to be honest, ice is too cold. What it does, there are a few different things that happens, but it can actually cause more damage to those tissues. And also, we actually want the immune response to be happening. We want the body's way of dealing with this is by putting lots of fluid to the burn. There's a whole lot of mechanisms that happen here, and so that's why ice just doesn't work. It does cause more damage. And so another thing that you need to do as well is, ideally, if you can, with that running water, that actually helps with the healing. So please, not only is it an important part of the first aid, but it's going to assist the healing process later, what you do in those initial minutes. So please, 20 minutes minimum cold running tap water is ideal. And remember, keep the unburned areas warm. So Jennifer has asked a question. Will you be doing a CPR class? We actually have just done them, Jennifer. And so if you go to the Baby to Toddler Show or CPR Kids pages, you will see them in our videos. So we have done CPR for both babies and children, but we encourage you to book in for a face-to-face class as well, so you can actually practice on the mannequins too. Now, Sarah has asked a question as well. She said, what if you're somewhere where you can't access running water? What is the best alternative until you get somewhere with medical help? Okay, great question. Often you think outside the square. Now, you do what you can. Is there a cafe nearby where you can run in and grab a bottle of water? Is there a garden tap around? Thinking about these sorts of things, where are some alternative things that you can do? I remember I had a friend whose child burned himself on the muffler of his quad bike, and so he put his child's leg in the dam because they were a good 10 k's away from anything. And so that was, I thought that was brilliant. Doing that, it was, yes, the water was not clean, but he saved his child's skin. Okay, his child needed some antibiotics, of course, but you know what? He saved his child's skin. And the other thing that we can remember with cooling as well is that it can be effective up to 3 hours later. So even if it's a good 15 minutes or so until you can get to water, go and do it, but still cool anyway. It does have, all the research shows that it does have a response up to 3 hours later as well. So don't not do it, okay? Really important. So another example, I'm going to tell you another quick story. My husband and I packed our kids up and we travelled around Australia for 4 months, 23,000 kilometres around Australia, went to some really remote places. And one night he burnt himself on the hot plate we were using. We were in the middle of nowhere. We knew we had enough drinking water, but it was not like that there were no taps, no taps. It wasn't an option. What did I do? I used his beers. So it was next best thing. We had a kind of a freezer section in a fridge that we had in our four-wheel drive. I got a beer and I poured the cold beer into the pot, basically a pot, and then I think it was some kind of frozen meat, sausages, something, and stuck it in there to keep that cold. It was what we had. I then used water also to clean that off as well afterwards, and we also had Burns cooling dressings too, because we had a huge first aid kit. But initially that was what we did, and I thought we were going to have to pack up and get back to the city because it was the whole palm of his hand. And we're always worried if there's a burn over a joint. We're really worried about that because we don't want our joints to constrict and scar. And that's really important. But it worked. We did the best with what we could. Water is the best. We improvised. Okay, so that's what we did. And also, Karen has said, is it okay to give pain relief straight away if somebody else is there to give it? Absolutely, get it on board. Follow the directions on the bottle, really important. And absolutely get pain relief into them, really important. And Marie has also said, can you submerge a hand in a bowl of cold water? Great question. So we need to, yes, you can, but there's a big but here. If we're submerging the hand in the cold water, then what happens is the water is going to heat up. So like as I just said with my story, we didn't have the option for running water. Geez, all we had was beer. Oh, well, we did, anyway. I know it's not ideal, but we did. Sometimes you just got to do the best with what you've got. You can put the hand in a bowl of cold water, but you are going to need to constantly be changing this over because the water will heat up from the heat from the burn and the heat from their body. So you need to keep refreshing that water over and over again. Ideally, that's where something like this comes in really in handy to be able to be keeping that cool running water over the top. But you know what? You do the best with what you have at the time. And that's why I had put that frozen sausages or whatever it is in there, was because we couldn't keep refreshing the water because it wasn't available. We were in the middle of nowhere in I think it was in the Kimberley. Honestly, we were a long way from anywhere. We were really remote. And so that's why, to keep the liquid in there cold, that's why I had the frozen sausages in there. The sausages were not going on the skin. It was to keep the liquid cold in there, rather than being able to refresh it, because that was something that we couldn't do. So I hope that has been helpful. If there are, we've got more questions. Fantastic. Very good. I know. There we go. We've got the CPR class demos on there. So great. Fantastic. Now, if there's no more questions, I will sign off for the day, and we will be back again with the Baby to Toddler Show, 10:30 next Thursday. So every Thursday at 10:30, it is our absolute delight to bring these information segments to you. So once again, tell us what you want to know down in the comments below. Please, please, please. Write down what you would like us to talk about, okay? Let us know. And I will see you again at 10:30 on Thursday next week. And remember, if you haven't done your pediatric first aid class, please book in now. We've got them online. Just go to the Baby to Toddler Show website. We've got them face-to-face as well. Just jump on the CPR Kids website. And remember, these skills saves lives. We know that. Thanks, everyone. Bye.